A very good morning, and for those that are just joining Morning at NTV, we are delving, or rather diving, I should emphasize, into the Kickstarter discussion, one that tackles the topical or greater issues of the day in ensuring that we give you context, but also perspective and insight on how and why it matters. This morning, we are going to be talking about international major shifts that is across the globe and why Uganda must pay attention, or exactly what it means for Uganda. We are going to be looking at events in the UK, the fact that that country has a new prime minister, and what that means. There is so much to learn, especially on the political scene, but also on socio-economic aspects, especially given the fact that what's happening across the globe in terms of economic policy that is rolled out in Europe very much affects us here in Africa and Uganda in particular. We shall also be looking at Chinese President Xi Jinping's continuing stronghold on power in one of the global superpowers. Of course, China is a country that is making inroads in Africa. Across the continent, we see so many projects that are funded and are being run by the Chinese. We shall understand exactly what that means and how we can, of course, benefit and where we stand in terms of how we can play a leading role. But we shall also return to close quarters in Ethiopia, where a conflict is raging between the government in Addis Ababa and the Tigrayan peoples. It's been on for the last 4 years, and the president there, prime minister there, is grappling with an issue, of course, that we want to understand how he's dealing with it, but most importantly, the aspects of conflict resolution under the aegis of the African Union. I'll be joined by two gentlemen, very usual suspects on the show, and of course, for much of their insight and perspective, Bernard Chankara is a public policy analyst at Efficacy Methodology, one of the leading think tanks in public policy here in Uganda. The guys there are trying to understand how best we can move forward as a country by being able to roll out policies and, of course, initiatives that are sustainable and work best for us. A very warm welcome, Bernard Chankara, to the program this morning.
Thank you very much for having me.
Of course, we shall be joined a little bit later by Alawi Semanda. Is an international relations expert. He should be able to give us a perspective, especially with regard to China's role and how Uganda finds itself as a proxy in what could no doubt be a global end game. And let me begin with you, and as we wait on Mr. Alawi, Bernard Chankara, we come on the backdrop of things happening in the country that are alarming. We have an outbreak of Ebola. In just a minute, just bring us up to speed with your understanding of our own way of dealing with this before we delve into the nitty-gritty of positing on international major shifts in Uganda's context.
Thank you very much once again. In 2000, I was a very young man in Gulu growing up, and that's the time when Uganda registered the first case of Ebola. So I was in a mix of it as a young man. I think at that time I was in late, almost completing primary school. And so Uganda faced Ebola, and it is turned out to be very disastrous. Over 200 people lost their lives. And so the importance of Ugandans observing the basic SOPs that Ministry of Health has been advancing to Ugandans is very important, because Ebola is a serious issue. But of course, that also links to the issues and how we've been able to respond. You realize that it is almost 22, 23 years down the road since we registered the first case of Ebola. And up to now, there is no institutions that government has been put in place to respond to a pandemic like Ebola, and that is very unfortunate. Not so long ago, I was on this show and I raised some of these critical concerns that how do government respond and proactively plan in terms of how they respond, especially to health emergencies. We've just had the COVID-19 pandemic. It should have reminded us how important it is that we should be able to have our systems in place, have our planned institutions, the training. You can see the issues that are being raised by the medical doctors down in Mubende. The issues are the same. They're raising issues of PPE, they're raising issues of risk allowances, and yet these are issues that are predictable. We are able to see them. We should be able to plan ahead of them. And we don't even have the legal infrastructure to be able to support this emerging pandemic.
Okay, no doubt about that. Yeah, just wanted a preamble, and more like something to take us into a reflective mode on how we deal with much of what happens to us in the country. Of course, later in the program, I will come to the issue of trust in government, especially in relation to Mr. Rishi Sunak's very strong statements about being able to ensuring that the British people trust government first as one of his top priorities. But allow me begin from the point of China. And for those that are joining us, of course, like I say, this discussion is going to give us context on the things that are happening across the globe and exactly how Uganda comes into play, or Africa for that matter, because most of what we are seeing right now is very much a proxy diplomacy and politics that is playing out. Developments in China of recent have seen President Xi Jinping re-establish himself as one of the most powerful men in that country since Mao Zedong. Many people are looking at him as a dictator, more like that, because of the policies that he rolls out and the sheer nature of grip that he has on governance. What is your take on his style of leadership? Well,
the best description for President Xi, His Excellency President Xi, is of course is authoritarian. Is more of a dictator, and that is a fact about his nature of leadership, and of course it is seen in the things that he has been able to do. For example, a grip in power. What does that tells you? It tells you a clear fact, because if the Constitution is very clear that you're supposed to serve 2 terms, and you directly altered the Constitution, because as you know, that Constitution was changed in 2018, paving way for his 3rd term. And so if you are a leader that is not able to respond or respect the rule of law, then you are forced to become a dictator by nature. And that has been that is the best description I can give President Xi.
Oh, no doubt about that. A description that, of course, comes into play with our own developments here in Uganda, the fact that a constitution has been changed severally, and of course one of the issues and the aspects therein was the presidential term limits. When you look at the fact that it happened pretty smoothly in China, and then it can happen anywhere else, and it makes China unable to rein in on any other country out there that has leaders that might seek to, for example, stay in power. It is a very uncomfortable discussion for many Ugandans here, but allow me engage Mr. Alawi Semanda, an international relations expert, for this particular discussion. I know for a fact that Mr. Alawi Semanda has a bias in Chinese relations to many of African countries. First and foremost, welcome to the program, Mr. Semanda. A very good morning.
Thank you very much.
You find us at a time when we are trying to piece together how latest developments, including the fact that Mr. Xi Jinping has this extraordinarily tight grip on power in China, but despite the fact that he has so much power, he has been loose on ensuring that what happens in Africa is first and foremost pertinent or in line with human rights. Just give us an overview of what's happening there and what it means for us.
Well, first of all, if you would allow me, I would love to say that I think the narrative we are having on international scene is something that is a narrative of international media, where they are trying to tell us, because any leader world over, see in the UK, what kind of leadership did they process did they go through to reach at the current prime minister? So when you talk about that the grip on power means being authoritarian, I think I would politely beg to disagree. And that is the definition that the Liberal Democrats are telling us, which I find to be so much lacking. Look, the guy was voted by over 2,000 delegates, close to 2,400, and these people are representing not different from what we saw in the UK. Actually, in the UK, even Parliament did not participate. It was quiet. We saw people writing names and later telling us, this person is going to be president. So if you tell me broadly, and not that I don't love democracy, I know what it is, I know how it feels, I've lived in these countries, but the narrative they are giving us is so much fraud that when it is done in their country, when Angela Merkel does 15 plus years, it is okay. When President Xi does it, it is giving a wrong signal to the rest of the world, which I think is not fair. If I go back to what you asked me, I would say the relationship, as I was getting in, I read the work by Dambisa Moyo. She's an African lady, worked in World Bank.
Very critical thing.
She clearly will tell you that leadership, where someone comes, does 4, 8 years, in the context of developing world, which China is, it does not work. Actually, even in the developed world, this explains why, for example, in Israel, which is a more developed country, we will have you provided people are choosing you. The question might be, maybe on who announces you are winning. Is it fair? That could be the question. But when it comes to you staying in power, provided you have the mandate, and you should underline it, that mandate also goes to the process. How have they reached at you? If you go to China, Xi will not lead alone. He has that politburo. If you remember his speech, I followed it, and the man speaks, we will, we shall, never anywhere did he say I. And if you are a student of economics and you see what Peter Drucker tells us, leaders who are effective, they speak we, they act we, their challenge is the team to work, teamwork. And tell me any country that has developed where they speak I. Even during Mao Zedong's time, they were doing we. And this is why the guy explains we want to open up.
Okay.
You see?
Yeah.
So I think opening up, and even the statistics that have been, the studies that have been, there is a professor called Deborah Brotag. She's the most scholar on Africa-China relations. She tells you we've seen studies now and then telling us that if you look at, because they've been telling us when you go to China, you'll find that the job creations they create in Africa, again, they are taken. But studies now are telling us that actually a third of all the contracts we see in African countries, including Uganda, goes to local people. And again, you blame the local governments in an event that this does not happen.
That's very interesting to listen to, no doubt about that. It turns the tables on liberal democratic thought. Bernard, you seem not to agree with that.
Well, there are quite a number of things that he raised, and I don't want to go back forth on all of them. But let me just pick one. You see, when the Constitution is written, before you become a president or a prime minister of a country, there are framers, the framers at the time of that constitutions, they have done thorough work. And probably in a larger extent, the greater majority of a given country has been consulted leading to that constitution. So there is a unanimous agreement that if you want to be the president of this country, I'm not speaking about Uganda, I'm speaking of the Chinese context. If you want to be president of this country, and we've gone through the communist system, and the system, the constitution that is there allows you to serve 2 terms. I think it is only fair to respect
that and not
as an accountable leader. You should be able to respect what the people that have come before you have put on table. And I think that is a very important element of leadership. Leadership is a transition. Because, my brother, when you become a president of a country like China, chances are you become so powerful. Remember, no doubt, you're powerful. You're a powerful citizen of that country.
Secretary.
And means that you're able to influence a lot of things inside. Yeah. So even if we have seen him win majority votes within the delegates, but I can tell you those delegates, in a larger extent, were actually handpicked, and these are serious facts, and they have been raised. Well, of course, we can argue and all that for the purpose of the audience, but let us not disagree on issues that are in the open. It is important that leadership respect the decisions that are made by the people that came before them.
All right. Before it becomes a contestation of what Beijing wants to put out versus what other capitals across the world need us to understand in line of what is no doubt a diplomatic endgame, let's concentrate on the fact that if China has a leader who is able to change or influence a constitution in his favor, how then, as a superpower, is China able to rein in on governments, especially in Africa, that are willing and ready to perpetrate their rule?
That's where we go wrong. It's not Beijing's role to rein on any African country and teach them and lecture them that you should lead like this and this. It is not London's role, neither is it Washington's role. It is African's role. Like it's been done in Britain against 51% populations who are saying, hey, we want general polls. And they go behind, they pick, like they did in Beijing, if you want to compare. It is the role of citizens of that particular country, young or not young, because accepting to be told by a foreign country because it is strong, that behave this way, govern this way, that is what brings confusion. See what is happening in Haiti, 99% because of US, France's influence, telling them how to move forward. So my view in this case is that they can do advisory role, which is not a must that it must be taken. Because we African countries and other developing countries are sovereign countries, independent, that people should be deciding. And if I might touch a bit to broaden it.
Very quickly.
Yes. The Chinese, for example, they have the so-called whole process democracy. Whole process democracy. People's democracy.
Yes.
Where they say it's not about voting. People should have democracy in terms of earning. People should have democracy when you go to hospital and their services. People should get democracy, should see democracy being done. Can I find food? I'm starving. People should have that kind of freedom. Because when you say that you've been picked by delegates, and this is what happens in representative democracies. Even, I've given you an example of the UK. See what is happening in the US. They are having midterm elections very soon, in just a couple of days. But again, it's not all Americans that are going to participate.
Have you paid attention, for example, to the fact that human rights violations in Africa have been an issue sought to be that has to be given consideration, especially in how the Western capitals and increasingly those in the East, including Beijing and Russia, how they relate with Africa, and the fact that China seems, and I must be very specific about this, seems not to care about the state of human rights in some of the countries that it relates with on more donor basis. Isn't that a concern for you?
You see, again,
that they don't
whereas
really care.
I strongly believe that we need human rights because human rights should not be compromised. I also believe it is not Beijing's role to tell Uganda that to do ABC, ensure their human rights. Because we Ugandans, we must demand our leaders and tell them, you must do this. There is a documentary that was done that has been later put down by Al Jazeera called Our Man in Cairo. You need to watch it. See Our Man in Cairo, how BBC, how Al Jazeera tells us what happens in Cairo. European Union, they will fly in, massage a dictator, do whatever they want, provided the man is fulfilling what their desires are. And it's not only in Cairo. We have other capitals which we know, because they are our
so
neighboring
in other
countries,
words,
I would not want to touch.
Beijing can do the same.
No. I am saying that the countries that are speaking about human rights, where they want to include foreign policy, they are not honest, because they massage these dictators, actually stronger dictators on the continent, because they are working for them and want smaller countries to listen to them. Now that becomes problematic, because, for example, a country like Egypt, if it is so dictatorial with its economic power, with its real power, we are going to discuss what is happening in Tigray.
Bernard
you
Chankara,
find that it has direct influence.
Allow him interject.
I just want to help my brother here. When in the international, you're an international relations expert.
Yes.
And I'm very sure you're privy to the extent that when you relate, there is an analogy in a Chole, but I can give a direct translation to that. When you go to harvest white ants, for example, you will not only harvest the white ants. The termites will also be there in the same pond.
They want a bit of that.
So there are generally bad behaviors that comes with international relations. And that is a fact. So while I agree with you that it is important for Ugandans to be very independent, and we must take deliberate action, not only for Uganda, but across the continent, Africa must take responsibility for its future and makes its decision. That we cannot take away. But when you are in the international space, there are certain bad behaviors that will eventually come, either directly or indirectly. And of course, you're talking about advice, and sometimes those advices are actually not necessarily advice. Sometimes those advices are tied to aids and funding in our context. And so those bad behaviors, cultures are likely, and chances are that it will translate or trickle in within our system. I can give you an example. How China, of course, advances its loan. Okay, they advance loans to Uganda, to government of Uganda or any other African country. But in the event of doing that, they actually appoint a company to be able to implement that investment directly. So they come with their own human resource. Then eventually in the implementation of such projects, these projects are implemented in the communities. So there is great high interaction between the Chinese and, of course, the local citizens. And in that mix, there is a definite transfer of values, even in the local spaces that we have. And I think in the international spaces, there are bad behaviors that are going to come in, and that we cannot take away from.
Okay, gentlemen, what I take from the submissions is that there are fundamental old and historical truth that must be excavated in order to understand how the politics of the day, especially on the international scene, play out. Allow us a transition very quickly to something that is exciting to you, allow Semanda, events in the UK. The fact that there is a new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, a 42-year-old British Asian whose own parents, one was born in Tanzania and another in Kenya, a very strong roots to East Africa, and without appearing to want to jump onto what could be a very misdirected euphoria about another leader outside there. What do you make of the rise of Rishi Sunak rather? I apologize for the mispronunciation of that name. What do you make of the developments there?
One is that it's a plus that for his own as an individual, because see the schools where he has gone. His parents saved to take him to the best university, currently I think #4 in the UK. And he's a rich man who has advised Goldman Sachs, one of the biggest banks that actually decides how the world runs. So I don't see it as a miracle at all. What I see as unexpected but also expected is how the media is presenting him. Whether he's Kenyan of background or Tanzanian background,
doesn't matter.
It depends on which policies he's going to follow. This is a gentleman. I respect him, how he speaks. He never even addressed people before he became a prime minister. And the way he was selected, Actually, he was not voted. They selected him.
They selected him.
Yes, behind backs. And all of a sudden, we see him coming and becoming a prime minister. What was his first statement? Those ones who rival the UK must be considered as extremists. If I might go to the critical view of him, I think this brings us a good dictator who will not be mentioned as a dictator, because if I don't agree with you, it does not mean that I'm an adversary to you. It means I have either seen a weakness in your views. But we have not seen his leadership, but we know how he will lead. How do we know? We've seen what Goldman Sachs has done. By the way, he was a chancellor before. Yeah, no doubt. I was just about to ask Bernard Chankar, a policy analyst, on that note, to given the background of Rishi Sunak as Chancellor of the Exchequer in London, it means that there's a real good possibility that the current economic turmoil can be, well, put to rest. Of course, we all know that the UK is still struggling after failing to land on its feet after Brexit. Do you see him doing the job that he ought and should do to be able to settle the economy there?
First of all, I congratulate him for being elected. Either was appointed or selected, I don't know in your language.
The constitution unwritten, allows them to select.
Of course, his rise to power is a good statement to the country, and of course to the global world, particularly because there are issues that are very critical. Yeah. For example, he is a person who is not a British by birth. He's an Indian. Is it Indian? Or
yes, Indian, yeah.
Yes. He's Indian by background, and of course his parents lived here in the East African community. So his rise to power is good, particularly because especially in the global village, where there are elements of racism. And so when you see an outsider in the context that he is not a British rising into power, it is a good message to the world. But of course, looking at his policies, when he was a chancellor, I can tell you, when he was a chancellor, during COVID-19, he adopted a policy of cutting, I think, £20 per week from poor government. And of course, that affected, and of course, the statistics indicates that over about 200,000 British UK citizens actually were at the verge of degenerating into poverty. And that speaks to who he is. He comes from a very rich background. He's the wealthiest member of parliament, and he has been fronted by what we call the shadow thinkers of the UK. And so these are invisible hands that you're not able to
Should
see.
it really matter that it will shape the kind of prime minister he will become?
Definitely, because he comes from the rich club, and rich people across the globe have accumulated wealth from not paying taxes fairly, and so that will have a direct impact on his tax policies, and of course raising question on issues to do with tax justice within the UK establishment.
Yes, allow me hammer this point down and bring the relationship that many African countries would like to see improve. When Obama came to power, there was a lot of euphoria and hope that finally the superpowers will perhaps have an opportunity to look at Africa from the lens of a person who could relate. When you see Rishi Sunak, I don't know why I keep saying Sunak, but it's Mr. Sunak, British Asian with a particular root in East Africa, is there any reason at all that we should actually care? Or even have hope?
We don't need to, because in international relations there is this so-called kitchen cabinet, and of course it is the kitchen cabinet that is going to be guiding him on what to do, and especially policy-wise, we already know,
on immigration,
as he has put, on immigration, by the way, he comes at a time when the UK has been overtaken by India as far as growth is concerned, GDP is concerned. UK slipped behind.
That's right.
India took over. They have been discussing with India on having uniform, fair immigration process for India, which is failing, and the reason they are giving us is that it will favor more Indians to move easily
into the
UK. And if you see him, he is also against it. A few days back, before he was selected, the BBC, they were interviewing one person who said, can you imagine if I became a Prime Minister of Pakistan? And again telling us that even when he's the Prime Minister, apart from the wishes of the kitchen cabinet, to the common Indian, to the common Kenyan, you'll not get anything.
Very quickly,
I wanted to add on this.
Quickly.
See, again, his party. I have a problem with his party that selected him, the Conservatives.
The Tories,
no longer conservative at all, because the Conservatives also bringing in another mix that also dilutes them. But again, see what the population want. They are saying we want polls. As we are talking, over 54, and this is a poll that has been done, and we know their polls are always consistent in a period of just 1 week, but they are not willing to go to the people, meaning he's not a leader of people. Even the people he's going to be speaking for and on behalf, they feel the policies will not be for them.
Oh, quickly, there's a video I need to play, so make it quick.
Let me contextualize this, his rise to power.
Wow.
Yeah, because...
Don't make it too long.
Yeah, just briefly. He is an Indian by descent, and of course he grew up in the East Africa. It is important because he rose to power, and they have not viewed him as Indian. They have viewed him as one of us. You get, and that is very important, especially in issues to do with racism and sectarianism. Now that feeds into where we are as a country, as Uganda. It is important that maybe one day Okello from Gulu can become a member of parliament.
That's right.
in Barara, or maybe another person. So it is important because we should not be viewed by our cultural affiliation, but by what we offer on the table. And I think that is very important for Uganda.
All right, there's no doubt so much to look out for, especially as Rishi Sunak begins his tenure at 10 Downing Street as Britain's new Prime Minister. Let's now switch to Ethiopia and the Tigray war. It has been raging on, and there is a humanitarian crisis that is, of course, underreported by all standards. There was a time the CNN and the BBC waxed lyrical on the nature and the extent of atrocities that were being committed, and African media were not as responsive as we ought to have been. Perhaps that is down to the fact that the resources and the logistics to be able to cover the war are also a question of its own. But what's raging on in the Horn of Africa is something that we need to pay attention to. We've seen a few tweets, for example, from one of the top generals in the country siding with the Tigrayans. What do you make of that, first of all, Bernard Chankara?
Well, it's very unfortunate that Ethiopia is actually facing this conflict, and Africa must pay attention because of the historical value Ethiopia provides to the continent.
Gentlemen, my apologies. I made a fundamental slip. We were supposed to go into break before we switch to discussing Ethiopia and Tigray. So I beg that you continue the process of refining that argument as we go for a break. Yes, let's go for that short break. When we return, we shall be speaking Ethiopia and the conflict that has the Tigrayans seeking to return to the helm of the politics in that country.
Watching Morning at NTV. Are you being a regular one? Humble
Management presents
of the Kickstarter discussion to the conflict in Ethiopia that is, of course, being mounted between the Tigray People's Liberation Front against the Prime Minister in Addis Ababa and his establishment. And I was asking Bernard Chankara, a policy analyst at Efficacy Methodology, a think tank on public policy here in Kampala, about what he makes of the conflict in light of the fact that Uganda seems to have an interest. We cannot specifically say it's officially that Uganda supports the Tigray, but one of the top generals in the military has often tweeted about the fact that Uganda might be aligned to the Tigray people. Bernard Chankara, you were saying something.
Yes, I was emphasizing the symbolic position that Ethiopia provides to the continent.
That's right.
We must realize that it's a country that was never colonized, and we also must recognize that it hosts the African Union establishment.
Headquarters.
So, yes. So it is worrying when you see a country of such symbolic stature being dragged into conflict. So Africa must pay critical attention to it, because it feeds to the historical facts of what Pan-Africanism is and where we want to go as a united Africa, as it is alluded to. In 2013, of course, the African Union made a clear resolution that the guns should be silent by 2020. Yeah, unfortunately, we are already in 2022, and the guns are still singing everywhere, and that is really worrying. Now, that feeds to the issues, to what extent are we able to speak to each other? And I think we must recognize that until we're able to speak to each other, then we can able to resolve the issues that is before us. What we see in the Tigray region, of course, the current development is very welcome. They should have done that earlier, but nonetheless, that now that it has come, there is a good conversation regarding peace talk. I think it will heal us.
It will heal us. Let me just, because of time constraints, I will reserve the fact of the general thinking about the conflict from Alawi Seman and ask you a very specific question. The Tigray People's Liberation Front that has an army much looks like a party that is disgruntled that it no longer holds sway in power after being dislodged. Of course, we saw how it came and then established itself. Right now, it's a case of, can you reintegrate us into the system so that we can also have a say? Something that Prime Minister Ahmed doesn't seem to favor. He's more concerned about the fact that, hey, you had your time, let other people be able to have their time too.
And you see, because unless I give you this context, I might not answer this question very briefly.
Yeah.
See, the events prior to Tigray crisis or Ethiopian crisis, Ahmed Abe winning the Peace Nobel Prize.
Nobel Peace Prize, yeah.
And then later being told, because you're a peacemaker, you've won this, you cannot defend the territorial integrity of the country, the unity of the country. And again, trying to coin him this way, and then the media also coming up and narrating, telling us what the problem is in Ethiopia, without even telling us, pointing at governments that have talked about blowing up the Great Dam there, the Renaissance Dam, without telling us the role that are being foreign governments that are coming in. Look, where does Tigrayan forces get arms from? We need to ask ourselves. Who is speaking on behalf of them? Not that they should not have people to speak for them because they are people, but I think we have foreign interference in Ethiopia, which unfortunately think foreign far beyond the boundaries of Africa. And I'm very happy to see that African Union is getting in. Unfortunately, we need to know who is funding the peace process. That could also be a very key, because we are talking about Pan-Africanism. When Pan-Africanist organization, their budget is largely from European Union, from Washington. Again, you can't really say I want to think independently, but my funder is a foreigner. It will be very difficult. But I think Abe, his hands are a bit tight. One, he must lead Ethiopia, a united Ethiopia. But again, the people who are waging war against the government they now seem interested to come in, provided you give us positions, we will make peace, but we must look at the root cause. First, if we go to peace negotiations without understanding why that conflict was there, the role of peace talks will be to silence guns without addressing the underlying factor, which I think at the end, unless they go back and solve it, might again erupt, because they will not be heavily integrated, put in the government as they want.
Okay, let's later Bernard Chankara give us the last word on this. A tweeting general seems to suggest that the Tigray People's Liberation Movement could be, well, in the good books of Uganda. Uganda is in Somalia, and the UPDF has been promoted as an army that can intervene and be able to restore peace, not guarantee it. What does this all mean for us?
I think, of course, I think the tweeting general, it was not a position of the UPDF, I believe. I think it was his individual position as
but
a
he remains a general.
But the fact that he held that position, of course, there is a very thin line between who he is and the position that he was holding before.
That's right.
Recognizing that he made that tweet when he was still serving
command of the land forces.
Now, we must also recognize that the Tigrayan forces that are fighting now were in government. And they also formed a larger part of that government for, I think, for about 30 years before they have now been pushed out of government.
And they were members of a guerrilla movement.
Yes, and they were members of a guerrilla movement, which is also, in a way, have a similarity between the Tigrayans and, of course, the UPDF before it would transition into the UPDF.
NRA.
Yes, the NRA. And before they so that is a similar background of two forces, because they're all guerrilla in nature. And also, so that particular issues communicates to issues that are very critical in many aspects that of course, it was not really, it was actually unfair for General to make such a tweet. I think it kind of way affected Uganda's relations in terms of the peace negotiations and how Uganda approached the peace negotiation, and of course bridging the two parties. But I believe that Uganda's position is that the Tigrayans and of course the Prime Minister's government be able to effectively resolve the issues, mediate, and the issues solved effectively.
Okay. Mr. Samanda, do you see Cyril Ramaphosa, the President of South Africa, as an efficient peacemaker?
I think he will do, we need to give him a benefit of doubt. I strongly believe that he means well. At least he has, ever since his tenure as the AU, in AU, as far as bringing peace is concerned, he has been consistent. And again, South Africa has not been pronouncing itself like how Kenya has been, how Uganda has been. I understand the tweeting general must have gone to Addis Ababa and apologized because he was called. But I see Ethiopia, South Africa being a bit more independent, and in this case, they should be able to make sure that we need peace. But again, we must see conditions that can facilitate effective and successful peace talks. One of the party in most cases should be seeing the other one having like real power. His chances of surviving should not be that great. And if you talk to a few diplomats in different capitals, I have a number of colleagues who will tell you that Ethiopian government has voiced concerns many times, or are choosing at some countries to be behind Tigrayan forces. And in this case, you'll find that unless they cut supplies of these foreign governments that are financing the war or fueling the war, it becomes a bit difficult. But I think, one, if the Tigrayan forces don't accept the talks to go in fairly, then they fear how are they going to be viewed at the end of the talks. And that means African Union will say, well, we have attempted, but you failed to accept the offers. But again, the offer must be a bit convincing. It might not be the best, but at least it should be offering them something. And remember, they are the minority, not to say that minority people have no voices, that their concerns should not be listened to, but I mean they cannot put their interests at the to say that the nation's peace and development should be held at ransom for their favor. So I think that Ramaphosa might do something for us. All right, gentlemen, many thanks for the insight and perspective on international major events and how they affect Uganda. That has been Alawi Semanda, an international relations expert, as well as Bernard Chankara, policy analyst with Efficacy Methodology, a think tank that is putting together the latest thinking in terms of how